What's up guys, my name's Stu, and today we're going to be going over the stats for 2 new ships, plus some stuff coming from an upcoming Lockbox. I know, Lockbox is not everyone's favorite topic, so we'll start with the other thing first, the other thing being a new event ship. The new event ship is going to be the Terran Sommerville Scout ship, which is going to be the prize for the Emperor's Will event. This event will be going live on PC on September 13th, the same day this video goes live, and running through October 13th. No date has been given for a console release, but you know how these things go, give it a month or two. To earn progress for this event, you can participate in the new episode Eye of the Storm, the new TFO Storm Chasers, or participate in any of the new episodes or TFOs that have been introduced in this new Terran arc. So for episodes, that's the Culling, Red Shift, Blue Shift, and for TFOs, that's Iupiter Eratus, Forged in Fire, and Counterpoint. Just any one of those once a day until you unlock the ship. After you unlock the ship, daily progress will reward dilithium. And before anyone asks, no, this event is not part of the year-long event campaign. Events for the campaign are always rerun TFO events, whereas this event is part of a new content drop, that being the new episode in TFO. Now onto the actual event ship, the Terran Sommerville Scout ship. As suggested by the name and the picture, this is a Terran version of the Sommerville. Now, to be honest, I've never actually been a huge fan of the Sommerville, at least for its looks. Honestly, I don't really know what it is about the ship, it's never appealed to me on a visual level. And frankly, just throwing some red paint on it really hasn't changed that for me. The stats on it are kind of interesting because this is a scout ship, so it's going to have a bunch of universal seating. So this is going to be one of those ships where you have quite a bit of versatility. However, let's get a look at all the stats before we jump to any conclusions. It's got a hull and shield modifier of 1.1, which that to me is a little weird. I would think the hull modifier would be lower and the shield modifier would be higher because this is a science vessel. That said, not going to complain about it because hull is better. It has a 3-3 weapons layout, which is very common for science vessels. 2 device slots because, again, this is a scout ship. In the bridge officer scene, we've got a Commander Science, an Ensign Universal, Lieutenant Universal, Lieutenant Commander Universal / Command, and another Lieutenant Commander Universal. Like I said, lots of universal seating. For the consoles, it's got 4 tactical, 2 engineering, and 3 science. It has a base turn rate of 19, an impulse modifier of 0.2, and inertia rating of 75, so this is going to be a very fast and nimble ship. For its power buffs, it has +5 to weapons, +5 to engines, and +5 to auxiliary power. It can equip dual cannons and will have radar flanking because it is a scout ship. And because scout ships are science vessels, it'll also have subsystem targeting, sensor analysis, and a secondary deflector slot. And it will have the Scout Ship Mastery Package, meaning it'll get buffs to weapon accuracy, exotic damage, weapon crit severity, and improved healing. The ship's console is called Ionic Deflector Inversion. What this console does is basically trade your shields for electrical damage. Your shields will go offline for a period, and your ship will start emitting several electrical discharges over the course of several seconds. The fact that it's electrical damage is kind of interesting because that is an exotic damage type, so this could be pretty decent for science builds. The passive buffs on this console are buffs to shield regeneration, and electrical damage, which, obviously, this console deals electrical damage. The starship trait is called Devious Rerouting. While this trait is slotted, you gain buffs to your maximum hull capacity as your shields go down. The amount of hull capacity you get is scaled with your exotic particle generator skill. So the higher your EPG, the more hull you'll get. This could actually be pretty good for science tank builds. Science tanks are becoming more and more of a thing, and they're actually kind of an interesting build type. A science tank is going to have higher EPG because, obviously it's a science build, so tying in hull capacity could be pretty good for that. The downside is that science tanks are a very niche build type, meaning that not a lot of people play them, so this trait probably isn't going to appeal to the majority of the player base. Overall, it's not a bad ship, but mostly just because it's a scout ship. That Lieutenant Commander command seat really isn't going to do much on a science build, but it could be a benefit if you're wanting to do something more tactical focused, particularly with torpedoes. But this is a science ship, so you're probably going to want to do something more science-focused. It's an okay ship, but honestly, there are better ships. Like, I would take the Vulcan T'Pau scout ship over this, which had an intel seat. Or the Lucari Draenor scout ship, which had a temporal seat. The T'Pau is a past event ship currently available in the Phoenix store, and the Lucari Scout is a fleet ship, which you'll have access to if you have your Draenor colony leveled up sufficiently. Actually, thinking about it, I'd probably take the Tier 6 Nova over this thing too, because the Nova's a C-store ship, so it's easy to get. It has a 4-2 weapons layout, so it's a little bit more versatile for a weapons-based build. And while it is a pilot ship, its pilot seating isn't actually that terrible because of its starship trait. And that's one more thing, at least the Nova is full spec. Event ships never are, which I always find frustrating, especially when I find one that I like. But that's a different rant for a different video. So yeah, overall, it's not a bad ship, but there are better ships in my opinion. Moving on to the next new ship, the Courier Pilot Raider. You'll have a chance to get this ship in the new Discovery Unlikely Allies lockbox, which will be going live the same day as the new event. The ship is one of the 32nd Century ships featured in Star Trek Discovery. Actually, it's one of the first because this was featured in the Season 3 premiere. The ship features a unique animation because these pod sections actually spin. In the show, they spin in the direction that the ship is turning. Sadly, Cryptic couldn't figure out how to make that work on one of their player ships, so now it just spins back and forth in a static animation. Which, honestly, from what we saw in the live stream, I'm not a huge fan of. I feel like they should have just left it spinning in one direction, kind of like how the jellyfish works. Because the constant back and forth, honestly, it looked very disorienting. But maybe that's just me. The ship is a raider, so this is going to be another one with a lot of universal seating. I'm sensing a theme here. Anyway, the ship has a hull modifier of 0.9 and a shield modifier of 1.1. Again, a low hull modifier is pretty standard for a raider. Escorts are kind of meant to be small and squishy, and raiders are meant to be the smallest and therefore squishiest. It has 5 forward weapon slots and 1 aft, 2 device slots. For the bridge officer seating, it has a commander tactical/pilot seat, an ensign universal, a lieutenant universal/miracle worker, and 2 universal lieutenant commanders. In the consoles, it has 5 tactical, 2 engineering, and 4 science. It has a base turn rate of 19, an impulse modifier of 0.22, and inertia rating of 85. So again, another small nimble ship, exactly what you'd expect from a raider. Its power buffs are plus 15 to weapons and plus 5 to shields. Kinda wish that was plus 5 to engines, but whatever. It can equip dual cannons, it'll have improved raider flanking, and will have pilot maneuvers because it is a pilot ship. And it will have the Raider Mastery package, which will include a buff to accuracy, defense, all weapon damage, and crit severity. The console on this ship is called Debris Screen. It's sort of a shield console, but it's also a speed buff console. Basically, it activates a shield in front of you that makes you immune to physical and kinetic damage on your forward arc. But while it's active, it'll also buff your flight speed and turn rate by 200%. Additionally, if you ram into a target while this shield is active, it'll deal kinetic damage to your foe. The damage will be scaled based on the amount of immunity shields you still have active on your ship, the maximum being 5 for this console, and when you do ram into a ship, you will lose your remaining shields. The console shields, not your normal shields. This console's passive buffs are a boost to plasma energy weapon damage, and a physical and kinetic damage resistance rating that'll scale with your throttle. An interesting console, definitely not something that's ever going to be part of the game's meta, but if you really want to go for the whole pilot ship theme, this could be a good console for you. The starship trait is called Special Delivery. Anytime you activate your pilot maneuvers, you're granted a 20% cooldown reduction to your pilot bridge officer abilities, and anytime you activate your pilot maneuvers or a pilot bridge officer ability, you can create 3 photon mines. This trait does sound kind of interesting, but definitely not interesting enough to make me want it. The cooldown reduction for your pilot bridge officer abilities, that's pointless. Mostly because it only reduces the cooldown of your pilot abilities, but also because there are plenty of better ways to reduce your bridge officer cooldowns, like an Ox to Bat build, or improved photonic officer, or boiler effect. Now, the fact that it spawns mines, again, is kind of interesting, but one, I don't like the fact that it's tied into pilot stuff. This would be far more interesting if it was tied into command, because mines are typically only used on torpedo builds, and command seating is kind of a requirement for those. And 2, the damage those mines actually do probably isn't going to be that good. I imagine this is just going to end up being like the mine version of Black Alert. Black Alert generates a bunch of photon torpedo spreads, which you would think would be kind of cool, but in practice, it's actually kind of crap. And I'm willing to bet it's going to be the same story with this trait. Plus, I have a hard time believing that this trait would let you just spit out mines anytime you use a pilot ability or one of your pilot maneuvers. I'm sure it'll have some sort of infinite cooldown that will prevent you from infinitely spamming mines. And that right there is just going to be one more thing that makes this trait crap. The ship is also going to come with a new experimental weapon, rotor rockets. This weapon could actually be kind of interesting. It deals kinetic damage that ignores shields. Could be decent for a torpedo build because torpedo builds often have buffs to kinetic damage. The animation also looks really cool. It's like a bunch of small blue torpedoes firing out from every direction of your ship. That said, while this does look like a very interesting weapon, I seriously doubt it will outperform Soliton Wave Impeller. At this rate, I'll be shocked if any experimental weapon ever does. So yeah, overall, pretty decent ship. I know I've said in the past that I'm not a huge fan of pilot ships, and that really hasn't changed, but that lieutenant level miracle worker seat does help make up for that. At least with that, you're going to be able to use narrow sensor bands too to buff your energy weapons, meaning this will be pretty good for an energy weapon build. So yeah, not something I would call a must-have, which these days I usually take as a good thing because this is a lockbox ship and therefore going to be very expensive, but if this ship is the kind of thing you like, it's a good pickup. As I said earlier, the ship is going to be released in a new lockbox, the Discovery Uneasy Allies box, meaning there's going to be a bunch of other new stuff other than just the ship. First off is the new 32nd Century environmental suit. This is the EV suit we see the Discovery crew use throughout Season 4. This suit has a special ability that lets you deal some hazard damage over time to your enemies, though frankly I will be shocked if this thing ends up being better than the Burnham CQC armor that's already available in the Discovery Reputation. There's also going to be a new console called Micro Dark Matter Anomaly. This one sounds like it's going to be good for EPG builds. You know, crazy space magic-y science builds. It creates an anomaly that'll follow a target and also pull in other targets, and ships within it will be dealt kinetic damage. The lore behind it is that it's siphoning off boronite from the ships caught within the anomaly, which in turn will give you a buff to your subsystem power. So it creates an anomaly, which is good for EPG builds, it deals kinetic damage, which is really good for torpedo builds, and it increases your power levels, which is actually better for energy weapon builds. This console is all over the place. Buffing power levels is actually also pretty good for EPG builds, because, you know, auxiliary power. But yeah, we'll see how it performs once it's actually out. And by we, I mostly mean Augie. They're also throwing a new starship trait in there, Sentient Starship. It's basically just a heal trait. Activating a hull heal while your hull is below 90% capacity will buff your hull heals. This will stack up to 20 times until you leave the current map you're on. It'll do the same thing for shield heals, but only stack to 10 times. Even as a tanking trait, this doesn't sound overly impressive. However, just from a roleplay perspective, the idea of a sentient starship is kind of interesting. Mostly because it's a great excuse for Star Trek Online to start up on something that they kind of joked about several years ago. Yes, I'm talking about the Star Trek Online Starship Dating Sim. Honestly, that's the only reason for this trait to exist. So yeah, it's cryptic. Starship Dating Sim when? Moving on to the ground stuff, we're getting some new anti-proton ground weapons, the Courier anti-proton weapons. Remember those hand cannon looking things that we saw in early Season 3 of Discovery? That's kind of what this is, but it's an assault weapon. I'm hoping we get the actual on-screen version too in the box. The last piece of ground gear in this lockbox is a new kit module called Blade Beetle Swarm. This is actually the thing I'm most excited for out of this box. We see these in Season 4 Discovery being used as automated defenses for a prison. In this case, they seem to work like both turrets and mines. You'll spawn a few of them when you activate this kit module. The beetles will launch saw blades at the enemies, which will deal kinetic damage, and reduce kinetic damage resistance on your enemies. If an enemy makes contact with one of the beetles, it'll explode, dealing even more kinetic damage. So yeah, it's both a turret and a mine, and I can't wait to play with it. We're also getting some new duty officers, one for ground and two for space. The first is Sister of the Kuat Malat. I'm not totally sure how this one works. It says this stuff will taunt foes, revive down bridge officers, and deal damage to enemies, so I assume this duty officer beams down and helps you in combat in some way or another, kinda like Lieutenant Schroeder, the transporting Saurian, but this blog is annoyingly vague on what triggers the duty officer. These next two will be the space duty officers. The first one is Foreign Specialist. Using an engineering bridge officer ability that targets an enemy has a chance to remove a buff from said enemy. This really doesn't sound like something that's going to be useful in PvE, but this could be useful for PvP. Not that I'm an expert on PvP. The last duty officer is called Meddlesome Politician. Using a science officer ability that targets an enemy will reduce that enemy's hull healing, and the next few times that ship receives a heal, you will also be healed. Again, this is another one that sounds like it would be more useful in PvP. We also have 6 new personal traits, 3 for space and 3 for ground. This first one actually sounds like it could be interesting. Rogue Scientist Aboard. This will periodically activate one of 3 abilities at random. Attack Pattern Omega 1, Torpedo Spread 1, or Emergency Power to Shields 1. The Torpedo Spread 1 doesn't actually function as an actual firing mode, so it won't trigger a shared cooldown with your actual Torpedo Spread ability. This one definitely has potential depending on how often it triggers. Is this going to fire off really quickly like Make It Go, or is this going to have some annoying 2-minute cooldown? Again, the blog is annoyingly vague, so we won't know until this goes live. The next space trait is Independent Wingmate. The first hangar pet you lost receives a massive buff to survivability and damage. If it's destroyed, that bonus will be applied to the next hangar pet launched. This does sound interesting for a pet build, particularly on a build that uses frigate pets. Frigate pets will deal a great deal more damage than standard fighter pets, so this could be a really nice bonus for them. And the last space trait is called Against All Odds, and it's just a healing buff, that's it. Of the ground traits, the first one is called Meditative Calm, which is just an increase to exposed chance, which, not bad. Gonna depend on how high that exposed chance is, but we'll see. Though it definitely could be useful with the next trait, Absolute Candor, which increases exploit damage. It also negates the first CC attempt on you. I don't know what CC is, so I guess we'll find out later. And the last ground trait is called Accept No Sacrifice, and it's another heal buff. It's basically the ground version of the space trait. There's also a new Vanity Shield. This one is the hull material off of the new Courier Raider. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of it, but maybe it'd look better on other ships. That's about it for all the stuff coming in the new Lockbox, but there is one more item to cover. This one will be coming to the Low-Buy store, the Co-op Malat's Sword. Its primary attack is a randomized combo of normal sword attacks. Defeating an enemy with this attack can apply stealth to you for a few seconds. The secondary attack is a conal slashing area attack. Defeating foes with this attack can trigger a full 360-degree version of this attack. And the tertiary attack is called Pledge, which targets an ally, and the wielder will aid that ally by stealthing them briefly, giving them a large bonus to dodge, and giving them a heal buff, even reviving them if necessary. Now, I actually really like melee builds in Star Trek Online. I have a couple of them on a couple of different tunes, and this weapon sounds like it's going to be really fun for me once I get my hands on it. So, overall, for everything new listed on this blog, like I said, I do like the sword, I do intend to get that, though I know that swords are kind of a gimmick thing in Star Trek Online, so this probably won't appeal to everyone, but that's fine, because it's low-buy gear, so feel free to save your low-buy for something else. The first two starship traits definitely sound interesting, but the heal one, that's meh. The ground trait's kind of interesting, but less so than the space ones. And the third one, again, heal trait, meh. The two space duty officers don't appeal to me at all because, again, they sound like PvP stuff, and I don't do PvP. The ground one sounds kind of interesting though, but that's mostly just because I like to have a ground build that spawns in a bunch of extra stuff. And if I can have a duty officer that summons in a Romulan battle nun, yeah, I'll be pretty happy about that. Very excited about the kit module, definitely want that. Exploding beetles that shoot rotary saw blades, that's just ridiculous and I love it. The new ground weapons sound interesting, but not something I'm terribly eager to have. Same with the console. And the EV suit, again, it's interesting, but there's no way it'll end up being better than Burnham's CQC armor in the Discovery Reputation, and that one has the merit of being free. So yeah, that's the Terran Sommerville, the new Courier ship, plus some stuff coming from the new lockboxes. Yeah, what do you guys think? While you're down there, be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button and that bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button or the thanks button, or you can find the merch store link in the description. Either way, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.